Have you ever noticed how an avoidant man doesn't always operate in a straight line? It's almost as if he disappears for a moment, only to circle back when you least expect it. To most people, that inconsistency feels like a warning sign, like disinterest or detachment. But when you understand the deeper mechanics of how an avoidant person operates, you realize it can be one of the clearest, most hidden signs that he cares deeply, perhaps more deeply than he knows how to express. See, an avoidant man lives in tension. He craves intimacy, yet fears it. Part of him desperately wants to be close, to be seen, to be loved, but another part of him is always scanning for danger, for the loss of independence, for the vulnerability that intimacy demands. So he operates in this dance of approach and retreat. And it's in this dance that one of the biggest revelations of his heart is hidden. Think about those moments when he finds a way to come back. Not necessarily with a grand declaration, not necessarily with long paragraphs pouring out feelings. No, it's in the quiet ways. An unexpected message at an odd hour. A "how are you" text when you hadn't heard from him in days. An offer to help with some small thing he knows you need. These aren't random acts. They're moments when the magnetic pull of belonging becomes too strong for him to ignore. Why does this matter? Because these moments are glimpses into the internal war he's fighting. An avoidant man doesn't simply disappear because he doesn't care. He disappears because he feels too much. The closer he feels, the more that alarm goes off deep within him. That alarm rooted in old wounds, old scars, old stories about trust and vulnerability. So he pulls away to regain balance, to breathe. Yet in those moments when he chooses to return, when he finds that quiet way to make contact, he's telling you something profound. I can't forget you. I can't stay away from you. Even when I try to run, some part of me finds its way back to you. That inconsistency isn't a sign that he doesn't care. In fact, for an avoidant man, it's often the very opposite. It's the paradox of love wrapped in armor. His nature doesn't make it easy for him to open the gates, but every time he circles back, every time he finds a way to stay connected despite that armor, he's expressing the depth of that bond. It may not be wrapped in flowery words or bold gestures, but the language of the avoidant is action. The language of the avoidant is showing up when silence would be safer. It's making an effort when distance would be easier. This is why it's vital for you to slow down and notice these moments. An avoidant man doesn't operate like others. He doesn't give daily reassurances or long drawn-out expressions of affection. What he gives is much more rare moments, where his heart wins out over his fear. Those moments matter because that's where the truth lives. They're like sparks that illuminate the depth of what he feels. Sparks that can only occur when vulnerability wins out, however briefly. If you can understand this, you can shift the way you interpret his behavior. You can recognize that when he finds a way to return, when he finds a reason to stay connected, despite his internal battle, it's not a sign of apathy. It's a quiet declaration of love. It's him saying, even when I don't have the words, even when my instinct is to run, some part of me chooses you. This doesn't mean accepting mistreatment, and it doesn't mean making excuses for behavior that crosses boundaries. What it means is knowing how to read the language he speaks, knowing how to spot the moments when vulnerability shines through. An avoidant man doesn't give those moments easily. When he does, it means something profound. So ask yourself, have you noticed those moments, the times when he came back when he didn't have to? The moments when he broke silence to ask about your well-being, the quiet gestures that spoke louder than words. Those are moments that matter. Those are moments that tell a deeper story. The hidden sign an avoidant man is madly in love with you is in that quiet return, in that rare decision to bridge the silence and find you. It's in those moments that his heart reveals itself, and in understanding them, you unlock the key to a deeper, more profound connection. One built not on words, but on the quiet strength of choosing to stay. Remember this, it's in the moments when he doesn't have to come back, but does, that you find the truth of how he feels, and that truth can change everything. Let it. If you want, I can now help expand the rest of the points or compile the whole piece into a seamless, captivating speech. Would you like that? You ever felt that quiet paradox with an avoidant man? That strange sense that even when he disappears, he somehow never truly disappears? It's as if he finds a way to hover on the edges of your world, not always in words, not in overt gestures, but in that quiet, watchful presence that he doesn't advertise and doesn't openly acknowledge. It's one of the surest signs that an avoidant man is deeply invested in you. And it's one of the least talked about dynamics when it comes to understanding how he operates. Why? Because for an avoidant person, emotional intimacy doesn't come naturally. The closer he feels to you, the more he feels the tug of vulnerability. And for someone with an avoidant attachment style, vulnerability can be terrifying. But terror doesn't extinguish emotion, it reshapes it. So while he may not always pick up the phone when you call or send long paragraphs when you text, it doesn't mean he has stopped thinking about you. The truth is, when an avoidant man is in love, silence doesn't mean indifference. It means internal wrestling. It means he's grappling with the paradox of craving closeness and fearing it at the very same time. One of the clearest ways this struggle manifests is in how he observes from afar. Maybe he likes or views your social media posts. Maybe you notice that he doesn't block your stories, doesn't remove himself from spaces where you can still witness your life. Or perhaps you get that sense, that unmistakable feeling that he knows more about your days and moments than he lets on. What you're noticing is not accident, nor obsession in the shallow sense. What you're noticing is the quiet witness of a man who doesn't know how to articulate feelings that overwhelm him. The avoidant doesn't operate like the securely attached person. He doesn't say, "I miss you" openly, nor does he pick up the phone just because he feels the ache of separation. Instead, he finds ways to stay connected that feel safe for him. He checks in from a distance. He monitors, he remembers, he stays attuned, even when he doesn't acknowledge it aloud. It's the paradox of vulnerability for him. The closer he feels, the harder it is for him to openly express it, and the more vital it becomes for him to maintain that invisible threat. If you notice him doing this, noticing when he stays quietly present, when he finds ways to witness your life from a distance, understand this for what it is. It's not a sign of disinterest, it's a sign that you've impacted him deeply. The avoidant doesn't watch from afar because he's detached. He watches because in some quiet, unspoken way, he's tethered to you. The avoidance is an armor, a shield, but it doesn't extinguish the ember of belonging that burns inside. What this means for you is vital. It means that you don't measure an avoidant man's feelings by traditional expressions of emotion. You measure it by noticing when he chooses to stay connected despite silence, when he chooses to witness despite distance. Those moments tell the truth. They tell a story that words can't carry. It's worth reflecting deeply upon this because it reshapes the lens through which you understand his behavior. It gives you the clarity to recognize that silence doesn't always mean absence, and distance doesn't always mean disconnection. An avoidant man in love can be a paradox where quiet attention speaks louder than the bold declarations others make so easily. But here's the takeaway that truly matters. This doesn't mean you accept inconsistency that damages you. Understanding doesn't mean excusing behavior that disrespects your worth. What it does mean is gaining the wisdom to discern the difference between an avoidance born of disinterest and an avoidance born of deep emotion. The first is a warning sign. The second is an invitation for deeper understanding and boundaries rooted in mutual respect. Because when an avoidant man is madly in love, he doesn't forget. He doesn't walk away from the emotional threads that tie him to you. Instead, he finds quiet ways to remain present. Ways that can seem puzzling until you understand the nature of his internal world. The witness, the quiet observer, the one who stays connected from afar, this is the hidden sign. This is how you recognize the depth of a love that doesn't shout, but lingers. Trust that when a man finds ways to stay connected, even in silence, he is telling you more than words ever could. Listen to that silence, watch for that quiet presence, and remember, the depth of a man's emotion is not always found in the noise he makes, but in the silence he refuses to break. It's in that silence that the beating heart of an avoidant man often rests. And when you understand it, you understand him. Have you ever wondered why an avoidant man will pull away just as things seem to be going well? Why, after moments of intimacy, he suddenly creates distance, only to circle back later, often stronger, more connected, and more present than before. To the untrained eye, this can seem like a game, a test, a tactic, or even emotional manipulation. But if you look closer, if you have the courage to understand the paradox at the heart of an avoidant man, you'll realize this isn't a game. It's a reflection of a deeper internal struggle that very few can comprehend. An avoidant man lives within a paradox. The closer he feels, the louder the alarm goes off within him. This alarm isn't about you being too much or too little. It's about the internal terror he feels when intimacy exposes the fragility of his defenses. The same walls he's built to protect himself suddenly feel like a prison when someone finds their way inside. So what does he do? He retreats. Not because he doesn't care, but because he doesn't know how to balance the vulnerability that intimacy demands and the instinct for self-preservation that avoidance requires. This dance between closeness and distance is where the truth lives. When an avoidant man disappears after moments of deep connection, when he creates space just when you felt the bond growing stronger, this isn't indifference. It's the opposite. It's evidence that he felt deeply enough for that closeness to matter, and deeply enough for it to scare him. What looks like rejection can often be a sign that he felt a level of intimacy he's not accustomed to allowing himself. Here's the paradox you must understand. When an avoidant man returns, when he finds a way to circle back after putting distance between you, that return is more than an accident. It's a sign that the emotional resonance he felt is still working within him. The silence didn't kill the bond. In many ways, it gave it room to breathe. The space he created was not a space to forget you, but to confront within himself why he felt pulled toward you in the first place. The moments when he returns, when he reappears in a text, when he finds an indirect way to ask how you're doing, when he suddenly remembers a detail you shared long ago, those moments are tiny victories. They are moments where the part of him that craves intimacy finds a voice despite the walls he has built for so long. They reveal the tension within him. And more than that, the depth of what he feels. An avoidant man doesn't run because he doesn't care. He runs because he feels too much, too soon, too deeply, and doesn't always have the internal tools to bear the weight of that emotion. To recognize this is to recognize that the heart of an avoidant man operates by a different clock and a different language. His silence doesn't always mean rejection. Sometimes it means internal processing, internal questioning, internal grappling with feelings that are too big for words. And when he returns, when he finds a way back to you despite that internal war, it is one of the biggest signs that what he feels is real. But here's the lesson for you. Understanding this paradox doesn't mean accepting mistreatment. It doesn't mean making excuses for behavior that damages your worth or leaves you in a constant state of emotional crisis. What it means is gaining the wisdom to recognize the difference between a man who is working through genuine vulnerability and one who is simply withholding affection as a weapon. The first is worth the patience that allows space for growth. The second must be met with boundaries that honor your worth. This is the takeaway. An avoidant man who returns after silence. An avoidant man who finds a way to stay connected despite the terror intimacy sparks within him is telling you something profound. He is telling you that the depth of what he feels is worth grappling with that fear. He is telling you, in the language he knows best, that this bond is worth the risk. So the next time you witness this paradox, the retreat followed by the return, slow down. See it for what it is, not as a test, but as an internal conversation he is having within himself, a conversation about belonging and vulnerability. And recognize that when an avoidant man chooses to step closer despite that fear, it's because some part of him knows that what he feels for you is worth crossing that line. Remember this, it is in that paradox that the heart reveals its truth. And in understanding that truth, you find the power to respond, not from desperation, not from doubt, but from a place of strength, knowing that vulnerability for both of you can become the bridge that transforms silence into belonging. Have you ever noticed how an avoidant man can struggle to say, I love you, yet somehow finds ways to show it in moments you might miss? The truth is, an avoidant person rarely operates within the realm of words. They operate within the realm of action. The depth of an avoidant man's love is expressed not in the words he struggles to form, but in the gestures he chooses to make when no one is watching, when it doesn't serve an ego or an agenda, when it emerges from the quiet spaces of vulnerability he doesn't openly acknowledge. To understand this is to shift the lens through which you measure affection. We live in a world that prizes verbal affirmation, bold declarations, long messages that reassure and comfort. But the avoidant man doesn't speak this language easily. His nature, shaped by a lifetime of fearing vulnerability and fearing the loss of autonomy, doesn't always give him access to that verbal realm. So instead, he operates in the spaces between words, the moments when he remembers that thing you said months ago, The times he shows up when he didn't have to. The quiet ways he goes out of his way for you, making space for your comfort when no one is looking. These moments matter because for him, they are moments of profound intimacy. In a world where words can be thrown around cheaply, an avoidant man chooses the harder path. He chooses the path of doing, of acting, of making a quiet statement about where you stand in the depth of his heart. An example? It might be a moment when he remembers your favorite book and buys it for you, or when he finds a way to help with something you didn't ask for but clearly need it, or when he chooses to stay present for a conversation that makes him deeply uncomfortable. These gestures might seem insignificant when measured against overt declarations of love, but for an avoidant man, they're moments that carry the weight of vulnerability he finds so challenging to voice. The paradox here is that when an avoidant man chooses to make these gestures, he is, in his own way, putting down the armor that he wears so diligently. He is allowing himself to step into the realm of vulnerability, one quiet action at a time. To an observer, this can seem subdued, almost too subtle. Yet within the heart of an avoidant person, that single action can carry the force of 100 spoken words. What you are seeing is an internal shift, a choice to express a depth of emotion he may struggle to articulate, but one that he feels deeply nonetheless. The challenge for many is understanding this language. It doesn't reside in the overt. It doesn't live in the grandiose gestures or long-winded promises. It lives in the quiet spaces, in the moments that can be overlooked if you don't attune yourself to notice. An avoidant man doesn't love in ways that make noise. He loves in ways that create resonance, in ways that seek to connect despite the walls that have long protected him from pain. To recognize this is to recognize a paradox. The very walls that an avoidant man builds to protect himself are the walls that sometimes obscure the depth of his emotion. Yet when those walls crack, when moments of quiet vulnerability seep through, that is when the truth shines forth. And when you notice those moments, when you acknowledge them and honor them, you create a space that allows him to deepen that vulnerability further. You create trust, you create belonging. But remember this, recognizing these gestures doesn't mean accepting mistreatment or silence as a norm. It doesn't justify a lack of emotional reciprocity. What it means is understanding that when an avoidant man chooses to act, when he chooses to step closer despite the terror it might stir within him, it is a sign that he has allowed emotion to move from the realm of thought to the realm of action. It is a sign that you matter. So when you ask yourself, does he truly care? Don't just listen for the words that aren't always there. Watch for the moments when he chooses to show it. Watch for the ways in which he chooses to breach the silence and make a space for you in a heart that doesn't open easily. These moments, however quiet, are often the truest declarations of love. Remember this, an avoidant man doesn't reveal the depth of his emotion with a flood of words. He reveals it with a single quiet action, a gesture that says, even when I can't say it, it's still here. And in a world where so many speak but so few truly act, it is in these moments that you can find the rare and quiet strength of a love that endures. Have you ever felt like you were talking to a wall with an avoidant man, not because he doesn't listen, but because he doesn't always respond in ways that are obvious, immediate, or overt? To many, this can feel like disconnection, like emotional indifference. But when you understand the internal world of an avoidant person, you realize that silence doesn't always mean absence. In fact, for an avoidant man, silence can be one of the clearest indicators that he is deeply engaged, deeply present, and deeply invested in what you're saying. Why? Because an avoidant person doesn't operate from a place of spontaneous expression. Their internal compass doesn't point to verbal affirmation as the primary mode of emotional connection. Instead, it operates from a space of internal reflection, a space where words are weighed and feelings are felt long before they are expressed aloud. This is especially true when it comes to moments that matter, moments that carry emotional weight, moments that can shift the dynamics of a relationship. Consider this. When an avoidant man goes quiet during a conversation that is meaningful to you, it isn't necessarily because he doesn't care. It's often because he is listening, truly listening, in a way that is rare. In a world where words are thrown like darts, filling spaces just to kill silence, an avoidant man finds significance in stillness. His silence is not a void, it is a space for internal processing a space where thoughts are formed and feelings are grappled with. What appears as emotional distance can often be emotional depth. Depth that he doesn't always know how to give voice to. And here's the paradox you must understand. An avoidant man can listen in silence and walk away knowing every word you said. He may remember moments you've forgotten. He may recall feelings you expressed long ago, not because he has to, but because those moments shaped how he understands you. To him, listening is an act of intimacy. It is a quiet way of telling you what you say matters to me. Doesn't mean you accept silence when communication is needed. It doesn't mean you tolerate emotional withdrawal as a norm. What it means is gaining the wisdom to discern silence that conceals apathy from silence that conceals depth. An avoidant man's silence can carry a quiet eloquence. It can reveal a vulnerability too profound for words. To recognize this is to understand that when he doesn't immediately reply, when he doesn't always give words to feelings, it doesn't mean he is detached. It can mean he is allowing the weight of those feelings to settle within him. This is why one of the hidden signs an avoidant man is madly in love with you is that he remembers. He remembers when you spoke openly about a fear. He recalls a passing comment about a favorite book, a favorite place, or a moment that shaped your life. He finds ways to acknowledge those moments later, long after the conversation has ended. Not because he's trying to impress, but because those moments lodge themselves deep within him. This is how an avoidant person shows reverence for emotional connection. Through quiet remembrance, through the deep internalization of moments that matter. Trust that when an avoidant man chooses to listen, chooses to remember, chooses to hold space for your words, long after you've stopped speaking, he is expressing something profound. It is a statement that goes beyond language. One that says, even when I am quiet, you matter. Even when I am still, I am present. Even when words fail, I am deeply connected to this space we share. That's why the sign isn't always in the quick reply, the immediate affirmation, or the verbal reassurance. Sometimes it's in the silence that embraces your words, in the quiet reflection that respects the depth of what you've shared. The hidden sign of an avoidant man's love is that he doesn't just hear, he remembers. He doesn't just acknowledge, he internalizes. In that silence, in that deep remembrance, he gives witness to a rare form of intimacy that only those who truly feel can understand. So the next time you find yourself wondering if an avoidant man cares, listen for the quiet, watch for the remembrance, and recognize that sometimes the deepest declarations of love are found in the spaces where words fall short. In those spaces, if you listen closely enough, you will find a truth worth holding on to, a truth that reminds you that love doesn't always announce itself with sound. Sometimes it arrives in silence, reshaping the spaces between words, reminding you that depth of emotion is felt long before it is spoken. Let that sink in, let it guide you, let it open the door to a deeper understanding of a heart that doesn't always speak, but always feels. Have you ever noticed how an avoidant man can remain composed, detached, and almost untouchable for long stretches of time, until a moment arrives when he chooses to cross a line that contradicts every instinct he has? This is the paradox that often goes unseen, misunderstood, or dismissed. An avoidant man doesn't surrender easily. He doesn't open the gates to vulnerability unless what he feels for someone is profound. So when he chooses to step into discomfort, to have a conversation that exposes him, to make a gesture that contradicts his habitual restraint, you're witnessing one of the rarest signs of deep, unguarded love. To understand this, you have to recognize the nature of avoidance itself. At its core, avoidance is rooted in a desperate desire for self-protection. An avoidant man doesn't fear connection because he doesn't care. He fears it precisely because he feels too deeply. And deep feelings expose him to pain, rejection, and a loss of control. So he builds walls. He finds ways to stay safe. He embraces silence, distance, and the veneer of indifference because in that space he can control the depth and intensity of what he feels. But here's the thing. When an avoidant man chooses to lower those defenses, when he chooses to step closer despite every internal alarm telling him to stay away, that choice is one of the clearest indicators that you have become significant to him. This is where the paradox lies. What an avoidant man does when he doesn't have to is infinitely more telling than what he does when external pressure forces him. The moments when he doesn't have to open up, doesn't have to stay engaged, doesn't have to make room for emotional discomfort, those moments matter more than anything else. Why? Because avoidance operates from a deeply internal script that says trust is dangerous, vulnerability is dangerous, stay in control, stay detached. So when he chooses to break that script, when he finds the courage to stay present despite the voice inside telling him to run, it's not a whim or a slip of the tongue. It's a decision. It's a statement. It's a risk he chooses to take because something in that moment is worth more than the armor he has worn for so long. That's why one of the biggest signs that an avoidant man is madly in love with you is when he chooses to step into discomfort for you. It might be a quiet, awkward conversation about feelings he doesn't quite have words for. It might be an unexpected apology when it would be far easier to justify his behavior. It might be making room for your feelings when every instinct he has tells him to guard his own. These moments aren't just gestures, they are victories. Victories that reveal how deeply he feels and how much he is willing to give for the possibility of belonging. Here's a lesson for you. When an avoidant man chooses vulnerability, it's not because he has suddenly mastered the language of emotion. It's because, for that moment, he chooses to trust. He chooses to value the connection more than the walls he has spent a lifetime building. It's a quiet revolution in the heart of a man who learned long ago that feelings can be dangerous, that vulnerability can be a weapon used against him. Yet in this space, a space where he doesn't have to step closer, doesn't have to make that call, doesn't have to say the words, he chooses to do it anyway. That choice is sacred, not because it's loud or overt, but because it's rare.